I thought my 26th birthday was going to be perfect. 40 family members packed into the rented community center hall, balloons everywhere, my favorite chocolate cake from Miller's Bakery sitting on the main table. Then my sister Madison walked up to me with that familiar smirk, holding what looked like a beautifully wrapped gift box. I opened it in front of everyone, expecting maybe a watch or a nice shirt. Instead, I pulled out an itemized bill for $26,000, demanding repayment for every birthday gift, Christmas present, and family contribution she'd ever given me. The entire crowd erupted in laughter and thunderous applause. I stood there holding the bill, my hands actually trembling as I read line after line of itemized expenses. $200 for my high school graduation gift, $500 for college textbooks, $300 for my first apartment security deposit. The numbers kept going, stretching back 15 years of my life. "Come on, Madison. This has to be some kind of joke, right?" I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow, even to my own ears. But when I looked up at her face, I saw nothing but cold calculation. "Actually, Brant, this is completely serious," she replied, pulling out what appeared to be legal documents from her purse. "I've been thinking about this for months now, and I realize you've been taking advantage of our family's generosity for way too long." My parents, Robert and Linda, stepped forward from where they'd been standing near the punch bowl. Instead of looking shocked or confused by Madison's announcement, they were nodding approvingly. That's when the first wave of true panic hit me. "Madison's absolutely right, son," my father said, adjusting his glasses in that way he always did when he was about to lecture me. "We've been discussing your situation as a family, and we all agree that you've developed some concerning patterns of selfishness over the years." Selfishness. I repeated the word, feeling foreign in my mouth. "What are you talking about? I've never asked anyone for anything I didn't need." Uncle Steve, my dad's older brother, stepped out from the crowd with his wife Patricia beside him. "Well, that's exactly the problem right there, Brant. You never reciprocate the kindness this family shows you. When was the last time you bought Madison a nice gift, or helped your parents with anything around their house?" Cousin Derek, who I'd always thought was one of the few family members I could count on, joined the growing circle around me. "I've been watching this pattern for years, man. You show up to every family gathering empty-handed, but you're always the first one to accept help when you need it." Madison cleared her throat dramatically and began reading from the bill in her hands, her voice carrying across the entire room. "Let's see here. Christmas 2008. That beautiful leather jacket from Wilson Brothers department store, $250. Your 21st birthday party, we rented the pavilion at Riverside Park and bought all the food and drinks, $675. When you couldn't make rent in 2015, we covered your security deposit and first month's payment, $800. Tyler, Madison's husband of 3 years, pulled out his smartphone and started recording. "We figured we should document this conversation," he said with a grin that made my stomach turn. "You know, just in case you try to deny any of this later. Plus, if you refuse to pay what you owe, we might need to post this online to show people what kind of person you really are." The crowd around me was growing larger and more hostile by the minute. Aunt Patricia nodded enthusiastically as Madison continued reading. "Oh, and let's not forget about the time we helped you move into your new apartment. Madison spent her entire weekend packing your belongings while you were at work, and we paid for the moving truck rental. $430. I felt completely isolated, as even some of my childhood friends who'd been invited to the party started murmuring among themselves and shooting me suspicious looks. Jennifer Walsh, who I'd known since elementary school, whispered something to her husband Marcus that made him shake his head disapprovingly at me. "Madison, this is insane," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "These were gifts. Family doesn't keep receipts for gifts and then demand payment years later. That's not how love works." "Love." Madison laughed bitterly. "Brant, love is a two-way street. When someone gives and gives and gives, and the other person just takes and takes and takes, that's not love. That's exploitation." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Madison flipping through more pages of her meticulously organized documentation. I've calculated that you have exactly 30 days to begin making payments on this debt. If you refuse, I've already spoken with a lawyer about filing in small claims court. Tyler continued filming while adding his own commentary. It's really sad when families have to resort to legal action just to get basic fairness and respect. My mother, who had remained quiet through most of this confrontation, finally spoke up. Honey, we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you understand that your behavior has consequences. You're 26 years old now, and it's time you started taking responsibility for your actions. What actions? I asked desperately. What have I done that's so terrible? It's not what you've done, my father replied. It's what you haven't done. You've never shown proper appreciation for everything this family has sacrificed for you. Do you have any idea how much money we've spent supporting you over the years? Madison made a grand gesture toward the assembled family members. I think we should hear from everyone who's been affected by Brant's entitled attitude. One by one, relatives began sharing their own stories of my supposed ingratitude. Cousin Derek talked about how I'd never offered to help with his moving expenses when he relocated to Phoenix. Uncle Steve mentioned that I'd never reciprocated when he helped me fix my car transmission 2 years ago. Even my grandmother's sister, Great Aunt Ruth, complained that I'd never sent a proper thank you note for the $50 checks she'd been sending me every Christmas since I was 15. Madison raised her voice above the growing murmur of agreement from the crowd. I want everyone here to understand that this isn't about money. This is about accountability, respect, and basic human decency. When someone consistently takes advantage of their family's kindness without ever giving anything back, that behavior needs to be addressed. The party continued around me as if nothing had happened. People refilled their cups with punch, children ran around playing tag between the tables, and someone had started cutting slices of my birthday cake to distribute to the guests. But I sat alone at one of the plastic folding tables, staring at the itemized bill in my hands, and trying to process what had just happened to my life. Madison walked over to the makeshift DJ station where Tyler had connected his phone to play music. She grabbed the microphone and tapped it to get everyone's attention. Before we continue celebrating, I'd like to make a toast to something really important. This is about family accountability and making sure that everyone contributes their fair share to the relationships that matter most to us. The entire room raised their glasses of punch, while I remained seated, feeling like I was watching this surreal scene unfold from outside my own body. My 26th birthday party had turned into a public trial, where I was the defendant, and apparently, I'd already been found guilty. After the crowd had dispersed back into party conversations, Madison approached me with that same calculating expression she'd worn during her announcement. Brant, let's step outside for a minute. I think we need to have a more private conversation about your situation. I followed her out to the parking lot, still clutching the bill she'd given me. The cool evening air felt like a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside the community center. You know, I've been planning this moment for 8 months now, Madison said, pulling out her phone. I wanted to make sure I had everything perfectly documented before I confronted you about your behavior. She opened what appeared to be a group chat and handed me the phone. The chat was titled Brant Problem and included 20 different family members as participants. My heart sank as I scrolled through months of messages discussing my character, my financial habits, and my supposed lack of gratitude. The messages painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. Madison had been systematically spreading lies about borrowed money, that I'd allegedly never repaid expensive gifts that I'd supposedly expected without reciprocating, and a general attitude of entitlement that I'd never displayed in my life. Look at this message from March, Madison said, pointing to a specific conversation thread. I told everyone about how you borrowed $3,000 from me last year and promised to pay it back, but then you just acted like it never happened. Madison, that's completely false, I said, my voice rising with desperation. I've never borrowed $3,000 from you. I've never borrowed any significant amount of money from anyone in this family. Well, that's your word against mine, she replied with a shrug. And as you can see from the group chat, everyone believes my version of events. I continued scrolling through the messages, watching in horror, as my own relatives discussed my supposed financial irresponsibility. Uncle Steve had written about how I'd supposedly asked him for money to cover my car insurance. Cousin Derek had shared a story about me expecting expensive Christmas gifts, while only giving cheap presents in return. Even my parents had contributed to the conversation, expressing their concern about my troubling patterns of behavior. "This is all fabricated," I said, handing the phone back to her. "You've been lying to our entire family about me." Madison's expression turned even colder. "Have I, though? Because I seem to remember you getting grandfather's inheritance of $50,000 3 years ago, and ever since then, you've been acting like you're too good for the rest of us. Grandfather left me that money because I was the only grandchild who visited him regularly during his last 2 years," I replied. "I spent every Sunday with him when he was dying, and you barely showed up for his funeral." "See, that's exactly the kind of entitled attitude I'm talking about," Madison snapped. "You act like you deserve that inheritance more than anyone else, and you've been living above your means ever since you got it." Tyler emerged from the community center and joined our conversation. "Madison's been showing me bank statements that prove she's been struggling financially, while you've been freeloading off the family," he said, producing a folder of documents from his car. The bank statements looked official, but as I examined them more closely, I could see they'd been altered. The numbers didn't add up correctly, and some of the transaction descriptions had clearly been modified to support Madison's narrative. "These are fake," I said, pointing out the obvious inconsistencies. "Are they, though?" Madison replied. "Because I've already contacted Channel 7 News about doing a story on entitled millennials who refuse to pay their debts to family members. I think viewers would be very interested to hear about your situation." My blood ran cold. The idea of being publicly humiliated on local television was terrifying, but even worse was the realization that Madison had planned this entire scenario months in advance. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed me social media posts that had already been made about tonight's confrontation. "We figured people should know what kind of person you really are," he said. "Madison's friends have been sharing the story all evening. I could see posts on Facebook and Instagram describing me as an ungrateful family member who'd been exposed for taking advantage of his relatives' generosity. The comment sections were filled with strangers calling me selfish and entitled based entirely on Madison's version of events. "You're destroying my reputation based on lies," I said, feeling a growing sense of panic. "I'm exposing your true character," Madison corrected. "And if you think this is bad, wait until I contact your employer at Morrison Construction. I think Dave Morrison would be very interested to know that one of his project managers owes significant debts to family members and has a history of financial irresponsibility." The threat to contact my boss was the final straw. I'd worked for 5 years to build a solid reputation at Morrison Construction, and the idea that Madison could destroy my career with her lies was almost too much to bear. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison smiled triumphantly. "I want you to pay what you owe, acknowledge that you've been taking advantage of this family, and start showing proper gratitude for everything we've sacrificed for you over the years." She produced another folder from Tyler's car, this one filled with what she claimed was additional evidence of my entitled behavior. The documents included twisted interpretations of past family interactions, receipts for gifts that she claimed I'd demanded, and testimonials from relatives describing my supposed selfishness. "I've been documenting your behavior for months," Madison continued. "Every conversation, every interaction, every example of your ingratitude has been carefully recorded and preserved." Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "Madison's been incredibly thorough. She's built an airtight case that proves you've been exploiting your family's kindness for years." I noticed that some of the younger cousins had gathered near the windows of the community center, clearly watching our conversation and probably live streaming it to their friends on various social media platforms. The humiliation was spreading beyond just our immediate family. I've already filed preliminary paperwork with small claims court, Madison announced. Judge Henderson's clerk confirmed that family debt collection cases are completely legitimate, and I have more than enough documentation to prove my claims. The revelation that Madison had already taken legal steps before even confronting me tonight made it clear that this wasn't about money or accountability. This was a calculated attack designed to destroy my relationship with our entire family. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked, genuinely confused about what I could have done to inspire such elaborate revenge. Madison's mask slipped for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of raw hatred in her eyes. "Because you've always gotten everything handed to you, and it's time someone stood up to your entitled behavior." As we walked back toward the community center, I could hear the party continuing inside. People were laughing, children were playing, and my birthday celebration had become the backdrop for my complete social destruction. I realized that Madison hadn't just been planning this confrontation for 8 months. She'd been systematically poisoning every important relationship in my life, and tonight was just the grand finale of her campaign against me. When we returned to the party, I noticed that my parents had gathered several family members around the main table for what appeared to be an important announcement. Madison's timing seemed suspiciously perfect as she guided me toward the group. "Brant, your father and I have some news to share." My mother said, her voice carrying that artificial cheerfulness she used when delivering bad news. "We've made the decision to downsize and move to Sunset Manor, that lovely retirement community over on Elm Street." My father nodded enthusiastically. "We're getting too old to maintain a 3-bedroom house. And frankly, the property taxes have become quite burdensome for people on a fixed income." I felt the first stirrings of dread in my stomach. The family home on Maple Avenue held every important memory from my childhood. It was where I'd learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway, where I'd built snow forts in the backyard during winter, and where I'd spent countless hours reading in the old oak tree that grew beside my bedroom window. "When are you planning to make this move?" I asked, hoping that maybe we could discuss preserving some of the family history before they sold the property. Madison stepped forward with that same smug expression she'd worn all evening. "Actually, the house sold yesterday. I've been handling all the arrangements as their newly appointed estate executor." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Yesterday? You sold the house yesterday without telling me?" "Well, you've been quite busy with your own life," Madison replied smoothly. "We didn't want to burden you with family business that doesn't really concern you." Tyler produced a folder of real estate documents from his seemingly endless supply of paperwork. "The house sold for $420,000, he announced proudly. "Quite a bit more than your parents expected to get in today's market." I struggled to process what I was hearing. Not only had they sold our childhood home, without including me in the conversation, but Madison had somehow maneuvered herself into a position of legal authority over our parents' affairs. "Madison, how did you become executor of their estate?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer would be just as devastating as everything else that had happened tonight. "Your parents asked me to handle their financial affairs several months ago," she replied. "They felt I was the more responsible choice, given your history of financial instability." My mother looked uncomfortable, but nodded in agreement. Honey Madison has always been better with money and legal matters. We thought it made sense to have her handle the complicated details. What Madison and my parents didn't know was that I'd been secretly paying the mortgage on their house for the past 3 years. When they'd faced foreclosure back in 2021, due to my father's reduced pension and mounting medical bills, I'd quietly taken over the monthly payments without telling anyone else in the family. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something important about that house." I began, but Madison cut me off before I could continue. "Before you start making dramatic pronouncements," she said, "I think everyone should know that Tyler and I used the proceeds from the house sale as a down payment on our own home. We found this beautiful 4-bedroom colonial over in Birchwood Estates." The devastating irony hit me like a sledgehammer. Not only had Madison sold the family home that I'd been secretly saving from foreclosure, but she'd used the money to buy herself a new house. Tyler pulled out his phone and began showing photos of their new property to the assembled family members. "We've got a 2-car garage, a finished basement, and this incredible kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. I had paid $68,000 over 3 years in mortgage payments, property taxes, and major home repairs. I'd quietly covered the cost of a new roof, a replacement furnace, and updated electrical wiring throughout the house. Every month, I'd transferred $1,200 from my checking account to ensure that my parents wouldn't lose their home. Madison, I've been paying Mom and Dad's mortgage for 3 years." I said, my voice growing stronger as the injustice of the situation became clear. "Every payment, every tax bill, every major repair has come out of my savings account." Madison barely blinked. "Oh, that's right. Mom and Dad mentioned that you'd been contributing some rent money since you've been living there off and on." "Rent money," I repeated incredulously. "I've never lived with Mom and Dad. I've been paying their mortgage to save them from foreclosure." My father looked confused and slightly embarrassed. "Son," Madison explained to us, "that those payments were your way of contributing to the household, since you spend so much time at our house and benefit from family dinners and other support." Tyler produced yet another document from his folder. "Actually, we have signed agreements indicating that Brant understood his payments were for room and board, rather than equity contributions. I had never signed any such agreement, and I'd certainly never lived with my parents or received room and board. But as I looked at the document Tyler was displaying, I could see my forged signature at the bottom of a rental agreement that I'd never seen before. "Those are fake signatures," I said, but the words felt hollow against the mounting evidence of Madison's elaborate deception. Madison shrugged dismissively. "Brant, even if your payments were mortgage contributions rather than rent, you would have needed to get everything legally documented from the beginning. Without proper paperwork, you don't have any claim to the house proceeds." Uncle Steve nodded knowledgeably. "That's absolutely correct. I went through something similar with my ex-wife's family. Unless you have legal documentation proving ownership stake, you're just out of luck." Aunt Patricia agreed enthusiastically. Madison was smart to get everything properly documented from the beginning. It's unfortunate that Brant didn't protect himself legally, but that's not Madison's responsibility. The family members who had gathered around our conversation began nodding and murmuring their agreement with Madison's explanation. To them, it appeared that I'd made informal financial contributions without protecting my interests, and Madison had simply been more business savvy about documenting her legal rights. Tyler showed more photos of their new house, including the beautiful landscaping, the updated bathrooms, and the spacious master bedroom suite. "We're planning a housewarming party next month," he announced. "Everyone in the family is invited to see what we've accomplished." The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. Madison was planning to celebrate her new home, purchased entirely with money from the family house that I'd saved from foreclosure, while simultaneously demanding that I pay her $26,000 for gifts she'd given me over the years. "Madison, you're keeping my childhood belongings hostage until I pay this supposed debt," I said, trying to appeal to whatever sense of fairness she might still possess. "Your belongings are safely stored in our new basement," she replied cheerfully. "Once you've made arrangements to pay what you owe the family, we'll be happy to return your personal items." Madison gestured toward the assembled relatives. "I think everyone here agrees that family financial arrangements need to be handled more carefully in the future. We've all learned valuable lessons from this situation." The crowd began to disperse as people returned to the party activities, but I could hear them discussing the evening's revelations in small groups throughout the community center. The consensus seemed to be that Madison had been wise to protect herself legally, while I had been naive about family financial contributions. As I stood there contemplating the complete destruction of my relationship with my family, Madison walked over to me with one final piece of devastating news. "Oh, and Brant, I almost forgot to mention something else," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I've been calculating additional debts that you owe to other family members. Uncle Steve reminded me about the money he spent on your car repairs. And Cousin Derek mentioned several other instances of family financial support that you've never reciprocated. She handed me a second piece of paper with preliminary calculations, suggesting that my total family debt might exceed $40,000 once everyone submitted their own itemized bills. I realized that I was completely alone, surrounded by people who had known me my entire life, but who now believed that I was a manipulative and ungrateful person who had been exploiting their kindness for years. Madison's campaign of lies had been so thorough and convincing that even my own parents had turned against me. I stood there for several minutes, feeling the weight of complete defeat pressing down on my shoulders. Then something clicked inside my brain, a sudden clarity that cut through the emotional devastation. If Madison wanted to play the receipts game, I realized that I'd been unconsciously preparing for this moment far longer than she had been planning her attack. I walked calmly out to my truck and retrieved a thick manila folder from my glove compartment. For the past 5 years, I'd been keeping meticulous financial records, not because I'd expected this confrontation, but because I'd learned the importance of documentation during my job in construction project management. When I returned to the community center, Madison was showing more photos of her new house to a group of admiring relatives. She looked up at me with that same condescending smile she'd worn all evening. "Brant, I hope you're not planning to make a scene," she said. "I think you've embarrassed yourself enough for one night." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "Madison, if we're going to settle family debts tonight, I think everyone should hear about all the financial obligations that need to be addressed." Tyler immediately started recording again, probably expecting to capture another moment of my humiliation for their social media campaign. "Let's start with your wedding 3 years ago," I said, reading from a bank statement. "When Tyler lost his job at the auto parts store 2 months before your wedding, you called me in tears because you couldn't afford the venue deposit. I wrote a check for $38,000 to cover the entire reception at the Riverside Country Club." Madison's face went pale, but she tried to maintain her composure. "That was a gift, Brant. Wedding gifts are normal family contributions." I pulled out the next document. "Actually, I have the text messages where you specifically asked for a loan, not a gift. You promised to pay me back within 6 months after Tyler found new employment." I read from my phone screen, "Madison, March 15th, 2022. Brant, I'm desperate. The wedding is in 8 weeks, and we're going to lose the venue if we can't pay the balance. Can you loan us the money? I promise we'll pay you back as soon as Tyler gets back on his feet. You're literally saving my life right now." Tyler stopped recording and stared at Madison with a confused expression. She'd apparently never told him that their wedding had been entirely financed by her brother. "Here's the second receipt," I continued. $75,000 down payment for your first house on Oakwood Drive. Madison, you called me because your credit score was too low to qualify for a conventional mortgage, and you needed help with the down payment to get a Federal Housing Administration loan. I showed bank transfer records proving that the money had gone directly from my savings account to Madison's real estate attorney. Once again, I have text messages confirming this was explicitly described as a loan, not a gift. Madison tried to interrupt, but I kept reading. Third receipt, $28,000 for Tyler's truck, when he couldn't get financing due to his bankruptcy from 2019. I wrote the check directly to Jenkins Auto Sales. Tyler's expression had shifted from confused to horrified as he began calculating the amounts I was listing. Fourth receipt, $42,000 in credit card debt that I paid off for Madison during her self-described struggling artist phase in 2020. Madison, you said you were going to lose your apartment if you didn't pay off your credit cards, and you promised this would be the last time you'd ever need financial help. I pulled out printed bank statements, showing a series of payments to various credit card companies totaling exactly $42,017. Fifth receipt, $37,000 for Madison's master's degree in fine arts at Riverside University. Madison, you said your student loan application had been denied, and you needed help covering tuition for your final 2 semesters. The crowd around us had grown completely silent. Family members were pulling out their phones to do their own calculations, and the numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. Sixth receipt, $58,000 in various other loans over the past 5 years. Car repairs when Tyler's transmission failed. Emergency room bills when Madison broke her wrist. Apartment security deposits when you moved 4 different times. Credit card payments when you maxed out your cards during your shopping addiction phase. Tyler was frantically calculating on his phone calculator, and his face had gone completely white. "Madison, this adds up to over $300,000, he whispered. I nodded. $352,417 to be exact. Plus, compound interest calculated at the same rate Madison is demanding for her supposed family gifts. Madison tried to regain control of the situation. "Those were gifts, Brant. You gave them freely without any expectation of repayment." I pulled out my phone and began reading text messages aloud. Madison, September 3rd, 2022. I promise I'll start paying you back next month when my art sales pick up. October 15th, 2022. Tyler's getting a promotion at his new job, so we should be able to start repaying you by Christmas. January 8th, 2023. I know we haven't started repaying you yet, but we're going through a rough patch. Can you give us until spring? I continued reading months' worth of promises to repay, money explanations for delays, and specific acknowledgments that these were loans rather than gifts. Tyler looked at Madison with growing anger. "You told me your brother had given us wedding money as a gift. You never mentioned it was a loan. You told me your family helped with the house down payment," he continued, his voice rising. "You never said Brant had paid for everything." Uncle Steve approached our group with a stunned expression. "Brant, are you saying that Madison has borrowed over $300,000 from you?" I nodded and showed him the complete documentation. Every loan is documented, with bank records, canceled checks, money transfer confirmations, and text message proof that Madison explicitly requested loans with promises of repayment. Aunt Patricia looked at the papers over her husband's shoulder. "Madison, honey, this shows that you've never held a steady job for longer than 6 months since college. How are you planning to repay these loans?" The questions were becoming more pointed as family members realized the extent of Madison's financial dependence on my support. Cousin Derek asked about the timeline of her various employment attempts. Great Aunt Ruth asked about the mortgage payments on their new house. Tyler pulled Madison aside for what appeared to be an increasingly heated private conversation. I could hear fragments of their argument as he demanded explanations for lies she'd apparently been telling him about our family's financial situation. My parents approached me with expressions of dawning understanding. "Son, why didn't you tell us about these loans?" my mother asked. "Madison asked me to keep them private," I replied. "She said she was embarrassed about needing help, and she didn't want the rest of the family to know about her financial struggles." My father examined the bank statements and text message printouts. "These documents show that Madison has been living entirely off your financial support for years." I nodded. The down payment for their new house came from the proceeds of the family home sale, but that house was only worth $400,000 because I'd been paying to maintain it. Without my mortgage payments for the past 3 years, Mom and Dad would have lost the house to foreclosure. The mathematical reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Madison had received more than 15 times the amount she was demanding from me, and she'd done so while systematically lying to her own husband about the source of their financial stability. Tyler returned from his conversation with Madison, looking devastated. "She's been lying to me about everything," he said quietly. "Our entire marriage has been built on money borrowed from her brother." Madison stood alone in the center of our family gathering, finally facing the complete exposure of her elaborate deception. The relatives who had been enthusiastically supporting her campaign against me were now staring at her with expressions of confusion and growing disapproval. I looked directly at Madison and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "If you want to collect on family debts, Madison, let's be accurate about who owes what to whom." As the family members continued examining my documentation and questioning Madison about her financial history, a man I'd barely noticed earlier stood up from a nearby table and walked toward our group. He was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, carrying a leather briefcase, and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested he was accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. "Excuse me," he said, extending his hand toward me. "I'm James Anderson, an estate and fraud attorney here in town. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I believe there are some serious legal issues that need to be addressed immediately." Madison's face went completely white. "I'm sorry, who are you?" she stammered. "I'm Brant's attorney," James replied calmly. "He contacted my office 2 weeks ago when you first threatened legal action, and I've been documenting this entire conversation with his permission." He pulled a small digital recorder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "Everything that's been said tonight has been legally recorded, including your admissions of fraud, your threats of harassment, and your husband's participation in what appears to be a complex financial deception scheme." Tyler looked terrified. "Wait, what admissions of fraud?" James opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of legal documents. "Let's start with the house sale. Madison, you sold a property that your brother had been making mortgage payments on for 3 years. Those payments gave him legal equity stake in the property, which means the sale was conducted without proper ownership consent." My parents looked confused. "But Madison showed us documents proving that Brant's payments were rent, not mortgage contributions," my father said. "Those documents were forgeries," James replied matter-of-factly. "I've already had them analyzed by a handwriting expert, and Brant's signatures were clearly falsified. Creating fraudulent legal documents is a felony under state law." Madison tried to interrupt, but James continued with the methodical precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment. Additionally, Madison's manipulation of elderly family members to gain control of their financial affairs constitutes elder abuse, which carries serious criminal penalties. He turned to Tyler. "Your participation in the social media harassment campaign, along with your threats to contact Brant's employer with false information, constitutes criminal harassment and defamation. These are not civil matters we're discussing. These are serious criminal charges." James pulled out what appeared to be court documents that had already been prepared and notarized. "I've spent the past 2 weeks investigating Madison's financial history, and the pattern of fraud extends far beyond her relationship with Brant." He showed bank records proving that Madison had been systematically stealing from joint accounts she shared with Tyler. "Madison has been withdrawing money from your shared savings account to fund a gambling addiction that you apparently know nothing about." Tyler stared at the bank statements in horror. "Madison, you told me you'd stopped gambling after we got married. She's been driving to the casino in Clearwater 3 times a week for the past year," James continued. "She's lost over $40,000 of your joint savings without your knowledge or consent." The lawyer revealed that Madison had also been using Tyler's credit cards and Social Security number to open additional lines of credit. "Tyler, your credit score has been destroyed by debt that Madison accumulated without your authorization. This constitutes identity theft, which is a federal crime." James turned back to Madison. "Additionally, I've discovered that you've been running similar financial scams on multiple family members simultaneously. You borrowed $15,000 from your Aunt Patricia last year by claiming you needed emergency medical treatment. You convinced Uncle Steve to co-sign a car loan that you've never made payments on. You've been systematically defrauding your entire extended family." Aunt Patricia gasped. "Madison, you told me that money was for Tyler's cancer treatment." "Tyler doesn't have cancer," James observed. "In fact, Tyler, you should be aware that Madison has been telling people you have various serious illnesses to extract sympathy money from family members." Tyler looked like he was going to be sick. "She told me her family was helping us with money because they wanted to support our marriage." James showed evidence that Madison had created multiple fake social media accounts to cyberbully Brant and spread false rumors about his character. "She's been orchestrating this harassment campaign for months, using fabricated evidence and manufactured social media personas to destroy Brant's reputation. The lawyer turned to address the entire family gathering. Madison has been running what amounts to a complex financial fraud operation targeting her own relatives. The money she's extracted from family members over the past 5 years exceeds $400,000. My mother looked devastated. James, are you saying that Madison has been stealing from all of us? Not just stealing, James replied. Madison has been operating a sophisticated con game that involves identity theft, elder abuse, fraud, harassment, and criminal deception. The evidence I've gathered would support prosecution under both state and federal law. He pulled out a final set of documents. I've already prepared preliminary criminal complaints to file with the district attorney's office. Madison and Tyler, you have 72 hours to begin full restitution to all affected family members, or I'll be submitting these charges for criminal prosecution. James handed business cards to several family members. I strongly recommend that everyone who has given Madison money over the past 5 years contact my office immediately. We need to determine the full scope of the financial crimes that have been committed. Tyler immediately asked to speak with James privately. I had no idea about any of this, he said desperately. Madison told me that Brant was the problem, and that her family was helping us, because they felt sorry for how badly he was treating her. Tyler, I believe you're a victim in this situation, James replied. If you're willing to cooperate fully with the investigation and provide testimony about Madison's deceptions, we can probably work out immunity for you in exchange for your cooperation. Madison stood in the center of the community center, completely isolated, as her elaborate web of lies collapsed around her. Family members were comparing notes about money they'd given her, discovering patterns of deception that went back years. James addressed the crowd one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight is the exposure of a criminal enterprise that has been operating within your own family. I encourage everyone to preserve any documentation of financial transactions with Madison and to contact law enforcement if you believe you've been victimized. Madison finally found her voice. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Madison. James said calmly, you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to exercise that right until you've consulted with a criminal defense attorney. The birthday party had transformed into a crime scene, and Madison's campaign to humiliate me had become the catalyst for exposing her own criminal behavior to our entire family and the legal system. Tyler immediately approached James with an expression of complete panic. Can I speak with you privately right now? There are things about Madison that I need to tell someone before this gets any worse. James nodded and led Tyler to a quiet corner of the community center where they could speak without being overheard. Within minutes, their conversation became increasingly animated with Tyler, gesturing frantically, and James taking detailed notes. When they returned to the main group, Tyler's face was pale but determined. I need everyone to understand something important, he announced. Madison has been lying to me about everything for our entire marriage. He pulled out his phone and began showing bank statements and credit card bills. I just discovered that Madison has been forging my signature on legal documents for months. She opened 3 credit cards in my name without my permission, and she's been using my identity to secure loans that I knew nothing about. Tyler's voice shook with a combination of anger and betrayal. She told me that Brant was jealous and vindictive, and that he'd been spreading lies about our family to make himself look like a victim. I believed her because I loved her and trusted her. He showed text messages between himself and Madison, where she'd been planning to frame him if they ever got caught in their financial schemes. Look at this message from last month. She wrote, if anyone ever questions the house purchase or the wedding expenses, just say Tyler handled all the finances, and you don't know the details. Tyler can take responsibility for any problems. James examined the text messages and nodded grimly. Madison was clearly planning to sacrifice your reputation and potentially your freedom to protect herself if her schemes were exposed. Tyler turned to face the assembled family members. Madison convinced me that you all disliked me because I wasn't good enough for her. She told me that Brant had been telling everyone I was a loser and a burden on the family. I've been defensive and hostile toward all of you because I thought you were judging me. Uncle Steve stepped forward with a confused expression. Tyler, we've never had any problem with you. Madison told us that you thought we were interfering in your marriage and that you wanted us to stay out of your business. She's been manipulating all of us, Aunt Patricia realized. Madison has been creating conflicts between family members by telling each of us different versions of the same stories. Cousin Derek pulled out his phone and showed screenshots of messages Madison had sent him over the past year. She told me that Brant had been making fun of my job and calling me a failure behind my back. I've been angry at him for months based on complete lies. One by one, family members began sharing stories of how Madison had poisoned their relationships with each other through carefully crafted deceptions. She told my parents that I'd been complaining about having to visit them. She told me that various relatives thought I was selfish and ungrateful. She'd systematically isolated everyone by creating false conflicts and misunderstandings. Tyler continued his revelations. I want everyone to know that our house down payment didn't come from our savings, like Madison told me. According to these bank statements, James showed me every penny came from the sale of Brant's family home. He looked directly at me, with tears in his eyes. Brant, I'm so sorry. Madison told me that you'd been trying to manipulate your parents into giving you their house, and that selling it was the only way to protect them from your financial exploitation. My parents approached me with expressions of deep shame and regret. Son, we owe you an enormous apology, my father said. Madison convinced us that you were taking advantage of our age and health problems to gain control of our assets. My mother was crying openly. She told us that you'd been bragging to other family members about how you were going to inherit everything when we died, and that you saw our house as your retirement plan. Madison showed us fake text messages where you supposedly talked about us being burdens and complained about having to help with our medical appointments, my father added. I realized that Madison's manipulation had been even more extensive than I'd initially understood. She'd been systematically destroying every important relationship in my life, while simultaneously extracting hundreds of thousands of dollars from family members. Tyler announced that he was filing for divorce immediately. I can't be married to someone who would do this to her own family. Madison has destroyed my credit, stolen my identity, and made me complicit in criminal fraud. James advised Tyler about protecting himself legally and financially. You'll want to freeze all joint accounts immediately and document everything Madison has done using your identity. The sooner you distance yourself from her criminal activity, the better your legal position will be. Great Aunt Ruth approached our group with her own revelation. I need to tell everyone something that happened 6 months ago. Madison called me crying, saying that Tyler had been diagnosed with leukemia and they couldn't afford the treatment costs. I gave her $8,000 from my retirement savings. Uncle Steve looked stunned. Madison told me the same story, except she said you had cervical cancer and needed money for experimental treatments. Aunt Patricia nodded in recognition. She told me that Tyler had been in a car accident and needed money for physical therapy that insurance wouldn't cover. James took notes as family members revealed the full scope of Madison's deception. She'd been running multiple simultaneous cons, using different fabricated crises to extract money from various relatives, while ensuring that none of them compared notes. Tyler provided the final, devastating revelation. Madison has been gambling online every night after I went to bed. She's been using money from all of you to feed a gambling addiction that she's managed to hide from everyone, including me. He showed bank records proving that Madison had lost over $60,000 in online casino games over the past 18 months. She told me she was working late on freelance graphic design projects, but she was actually gambling away money that came from her own family members. The community center had become completely quiet, except for the sound of people crying and whispering among themselves. Madison's campaign to humiliate me had exposed a criminal enterprise that had been systematically victimizing our entire extended family. James addressed the group with professional composure. This level of financial fraud typically results in significant prison time, especially when it involves elder abuse and identity theft. Madison is facing potentially decades in federal prison unless she agrees to full restitution and cooperation. Madison remained silent in the center of our gathering, finally understanding that her elaborate schemes had collapsed entirely. She'd lost her husband, her family, her home, and potentially her freedom, all because she'd decided to publicly humiliate me over imaginary debts. Tyler walked over to Madison one final time. "I'll be staying at my brother's house until I can figure out how to rebuild my life. Don't contact me unless it's through lawyers." The family members who had enthusiastically supported Madison's attack on me were now approaching me with apologies and explanations. They'd all been victims of her manipulation, and they were beginning to understand how skillfully she'd orchestrated tonight's confrontation to serve her own criminal purposes. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Madison's criminal enterprise became clear as James worked with law enforcement to investigate her activities. The district attorney's office filed charges including fraud identity theft, elder abuse harassment, and criminal conspiracy. Madison's choice was simple: face 30 years in federal prison, or agree to comprehensive restitution and cooperation with authorities. She chose restitution, agreeing to pay back every penny she'd stolen from family members, plus interest and legal costs. The total amount exceeded $450,000. Tyler provided crucial testimony that helped prosecutors understand how Madison had manipulated multiple family members simultaneously. His cooperation earned him immunity from prosecution, and he began the difficult process of rebuilding his credit and reputation. The sale of the family home was legally reversed when James proved that Madison had sold property without proper ownership consent. Since I'd been making mortgage payments for 3 years, I had accumulated significant equity in the house, and the court awarded me full ownership with a clear title. Madison entered a court-ordered financial counseling program and began working with a gambling addiction specialist. As part of her restitution agreement, she was required to perform 800 hours of community service, educating other families about financial fraud prevention. My parents moved back into the family home temporarily while we rebuilt our relationship. They were devastated by Madison's manipulation, but grateful to understand the truth about my financial contributions to their welfare. We established new family communication guidelines and financial boundaries to prevent similar deceptions in the future. Uncle Steve and Aunt Patricia organized a proper birthday celebration for me, inviting everyone who had been affected by Madison's schemes. The party was smaller, but infinitely more genuine than the original gathering. Family members shared stories about the ways Madison had manipulated their relationships, and we began the process of healing the damage she'd caused. I established a family trust to protect future inheritance from manipulation and ensure that elderly family members would never again be vulnerable to financial exploitation. The trust included legal safeguards and required multiple family member approval for any significant financial decisions. The experience taught me the importance of documenting family financial arrangements and setting clear boundaries about money. I started a blog called Family Financial Truth that helped thousands of families recognize and prevent financial abuse by relatives. My story attracted attention from social workers and victim advocates who invited me to speak at conferences about family financial fraud. Through these speaking engagements, I met Sarah Martinez, a social worker who specialized in helping families recover from financial abuse. Sarah and I discovered that we shared similar experiences with manipulative family members, and our friendship gradually developed into something deeper. She helped me understand that Madison's behavior stemmed from deep psychological issues, including gambling addiction, narcissistic personality traits, and pathological jealousy. I used the family house as collateral to start a nonprofit organization called Family Financial Justice that provided legal assistance to families dealing with financial abuse. The organization helped more than 200 families recover stolen money and prosecute relatives who had committed financial crimes. Madison eventually completed her restitution payments by selling her art collection and taking a steady job at a local nonprofit organization. Her recovery was slow and difficult, but she began attending family therapy sessions where she acknowledged the enormous harm she'd caused. Tyler rebuilt his life carefully, working with credit counselors to repair the damage Madison had done to his financial reputation. He eventually remarried and became an advocate for men who had been victimized by financial fraud within their relationships. My parents and I developed a much stronger relationship based on honest communication and mutual respect. They frequently told people about how I'd saved their home from foreclosure without seeking recognition or gratitude. Their pride in my integrity became a source of healing for our entire family. The experience taught our family that love cannot be measured in dollars, and that keeping financial score in relationships destroys the very bonds that money is supposed to strengthen. True family support means lifting each other up during difficult times without expecting repayment or recognition. Great Aunt Ruth became one of my strongest advocates, frequently telling other elderly community members about the importance of recognizing financial manipulation by family members. Her story helped several other families identify and stop similar fraud schemes. Uncle Steve and Aunt Patricia used their experience with Madison's deception to create a family financial education program at their church. They taught workshops about setting healthy boundaries and recognizing warning signs of financial manipulation by relatives. Cousin Derek apologized repeatedly for believing Madison's lies about me and became one of my closest family allies. He helped me understand that Madison had been systematically isolating family members from each other for years by creating false conflicts and misunderstandings. The community center where my birthday party had taken place invited me to speak about family financial fraud at their annual community education event. My presentation helped dozens of families recognize similar patterns of manipulation and seek appropriate help. 2 years after that devastating birthday party, I celebrated my 28th birthday, surrounded by family members who had learned valuable lessons about trust communication and unconditional love. The celebration was simple but meaningful, focused on gratitude and genuine connection rather than expensive gifts or elaborate displays. Madison attended the party with permission from our family and her probation officer. She gave a heartfelt apology to everyone she'd harmed and presented me with a handwritten letter acknowledging her crimes and expressing genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused. Her apology letter became part of our family's healing process, not because it erased the damage she'd done, but because it demonstrated that people can change when they take responsibility for their actions and commit to making amends. The birthday party ended with our family sharing stories about the positive changes that had emerged from our collective trauma. We'd learned to communicate more honestly, set healthier boundaries, and support each other without keeping score of our contributions. Sarah and I announced our engagement that evening surrounded by family members who had learned to recognize and appreciate genuine love. Our relationship was built on transparency, mutual respect, and shared values about family loyalty and financial integrity. The final lesson from our family's experience was that manipulation and deception ultimately destroy the manipulator more than their victims. Madison lost everything that mattered to her because she chose to exploit the people who loved her most. But families can heal from financial abuse when they're willing to face the truth, support each other through difficult transitions, and commit to building relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. Love doesn't require keeping receipts, and genuine family bonds grow stronger when they're tested by adversity. Our story became a reminder that justice isn't just about punishment or restitution. True justice means creating systems that protect vulnerable people and building relationships that are strong enough to survive the truth about who we really are. Have you ever experienced financial manipulation or abuse from a family member? How did you handle the situation, and what advice would you give to others dealing with similar challenges? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below to help other viewers who might be facing comparable struggles. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help us reach more people who need to hear about family financial fraud prevention. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger relationships. And please share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding the warning signs of financial manipulation by relatives. Thank you for watching, and remember that your family relationships should lift you up, not tear you down financially or emotionally.